Hello again. This is Joe Yudin, owner of Touring Israel Luxury Private Tours. And because you can't come to Israel because of the pandemic, we're going to bring a little bit of Israel to you. And today we have an interesting guide who specializes in Christian tours. Her name is Daphne Bondy. She's one of the most experienced guides in all of Israel and is considered an expert in Christianity. Welcome, Daphne Bondy. How are you doing today?
Great, wonderful. And not doing in the old city and Palm Sunday and Easter. That's a little bit upsetting, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, it sure is. This is actually one of the busiest seasons for tourism in Israel, and nothing's going on. Not only is it busy with incoming tourists for the holidays, for Easter and Passover, but it's very busy with Israelis who, generally speaking, take a 2-week vacation the week before Passover and the week of Passover and travel around Israel all over the place. And usually this is like the worst time to travel because there's so many people here in the hotels and on the roads and on the beaches and the parks that you can't move. And I usually just shutter myself at home. And now everything's free, but I can't go anywhere. It's kind of ironic.
Well, this year, Easter and Passover are very close to each other.
Right.
Sunday was the Palm Sunday. Next Sunday, it's Easter. Wednesday, it's the Jewish Passover. And that's all about insanity, holiness, happiness, understanding. Usually in Christianity, we hear all the time constantly about Christmas, Christmas. But the heart, the source of Christianity, it's about Easter. Easter, it's also the beginning, springtime, the new year. And it's the most, I think, drastical understanding in Christianity. Jesus was born, that's Christmas, that's wonderful, but you have lots of babies that are being born. But the essence of Easter, it's the resurrection, something that we cannot understand. And that's the importance. Now, Jesus, as all the pilgrims, used to come in a main high holiday, which is the Passover, to the Temple of Jerusalem. There were some major events. So he walked all the way, or rode all the way from the north to Jerusalem, stayed in Mount of Olives, which Mount of Olives, it's not just the smallest part, it's a large area. And he stayed in Beit Onyah. And then he asked all of a sudden his disciples to bring him a pure donkey, a pure white donkey. Why would they come and go and bring a white pure donkey? And then he explained to them he needs a brand new donkey that no one went on him. And if the natives will ask you, why do you need a plain white one? Tell him the gods needs it to walk into Jerusalem, into the temple. And that's what happened. They brought him the white donkey. He went all the way from Beit Onyah, which means that was a large date figs and date palm area. And he walked with his disciples, and there were the natives that were glorifying him with palms. Where does the palm come from? Palms in Roman time has been the victory, honoring, respecting, very similar to the red carpet for dignitarians of today. And he was appreciated. A lot of people followed him. He was crucified, he was buried, and then he was resurrected again from Mount of Olives. But the resurrection took place in Easter, and that's what we are celebrating. And that's the glory, and that's the main belief. We don't know how to deal with resurrection. Yes, Jesus resurrected Lazarus out of the death, but right here, Jesus seems to be at the beginning as an ordinary man, a human being. Oh, he's the Son of God. He's God. He was resurrected. He sacrificed himself for your own salvation. He approached to Jerusalem with his disciples. He was very well welcomed. He was going to the temple to sacrifice. And then they have rented a room on the second floor to celebrate the Passover, which is very intimate. Even today, the Jews would have celebrated among their families and their dearest. So it's not a major show. And they were handling the Passover, and then he was blessing the wine. And then he said to
let's stop for a second there. So the Passover festival, there were three pilgrimages for the Jews, not only at the time in the ancient world when the temple still stood in Jerusalem, the temple which is the spot where, according to Judaism, God created the world from, where Abraham took Isaac up to sacrifice him, and instead God sends when Abraham was going to show that he would listen to God and even sacrifice his own son, God sent an angel down and stopped the sacrifice of Isaac, and instead gave a ram that was stuck in the bushes on the side. So there, on that spot, is where King Solomon built the first temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians. Zerubbabel built the second temple, which was later expanded by Ezra, Nehemiah, and the Maccabees, and finally King Herod. And now when Jesus, there's a Temple Mount right there. When we come to the story of Passover in the time of Jesus, and Jesus comes to the temple on the Temple Mount, that's the temple that he sees, King Herod's temple. And the Jews, like they always have every year, there's the main street, Jerusalem, that you were just talking about. They come up to the temple on the three festivals. We have, of course, Sukkot, the Tabernacles, Shavuot, the Feast of the Harvest, and this one, the Passover, which celebrates, there's the first street, Jerusalem underground being excavated, the Passover, which celebrates Jewish freedom, Jewish independence, that Moses, through God through Moses, I should say, takes the Jews out of Egypt into freedom, creates Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, brings our ancestors into the land of Israel and conquers it. So there's a certain parallel. Why does this resurrection and crucifixion and resurrection occur on the Passover holiday? Why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, as the rest of the people, Jesus walked all the way with his disciples to Jerusalem, one of the main high holidays. By that time, that also has been the new year, springtime, receiving, and everyone would have brought his own little gift and his own sacrificing, but there was also the spirituality. That was something that people were willing to do, one of the main holidays. And that's why he came to Jerusalem. Passover, or Pascha, as you would call it, or Easter, any way you want to name it, it's basically the same holiday. Right. And just to commemorate the Exodus from Egypt and coming also into the promised land at the end. Although a few generations were lost, but that's the renewal and the continuation. And that's why was that celebration. And more than that, everyone would have brought a little bit from the sacrificing back to his intimate family. And then they would have blessed the wine and they would have blessed the bread. What Jesus did, he said to his disciples, this wine, it's my blood. Mm-hmm. This is my flesh. That means that you're changing the religion. I am the new coming Messiah. I am the Messiah that you are waiting for. And that's why the Eucharist or the Mass or the communion, it's the connection. And that's all started in Easter in Jerusalem.
Right. So basically, Jesus is saying that when Abraham took Isaac to sacrifice him and God provided the ram, the lamb, right? Jesus is saying that he is the lamb. He is the sacrifice, correct?
Exactly. Because he sacrificed himself. He knew he will be betrayed by Judas. He knew what would be happening, and people couldn't understand. They were shocked. How come the man that they followed has been crucified with two other thieves as a human being? But the understanding is that he did all that kind of show to show the people that he sacrificed himself as a human being. He had two natures for their own salvation. And that's the importance of the Passover, or Easter or Pascha. But then he was resurrected after 3 days, something that we've never heard about it in all religions, in all history, that someone was resurrected.
But at the time, and today as well, in the Jewish faith, And we see this in the Talmud. We see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a tomb of the type that Jesus would have been buried in. You can see the stone that gets rolled to seal the tomb. But as I was saying, in Judaism, we do have the tradition, the legend that when the Messiah comes, the dead will rise. I mean, that's why Jews, when they get buried on the Mount of Olives, or anywhere else in the world for that matter, they always point their feet towards the temple, towards the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So when the Messiah comes, when they're resurrected, they can walk to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount. So there is this idea of resurrection at the time, probably dating back to the 2nd or 3rd century BCE, and we see it with the various sects in Judaism at the time of Jesus and until today of resurrection. Here we can see the Mount of Olives with all the tombstones off in the distance. Correct?
Exactly. But also, even from a Jewish perspective, the Messiah should be connected or descended from the house of David as Jesus via Joseph. And he would approach the city on a white donkey, right, which signified purity.
Right.
And that's how the Jews believe he would arrive. And that's when he would approach. In Christianity, that's what happened. He was here, he was risen, and he will return.
So go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
So let's take a step back. So Jesus goes to Mount Zion. Okay, he goes to Mark's house, and he tells his disciples. He's been preaching in the Galilee. He does miracles. He builds up a following. He triumphantly comes into Jerusalem. He camps out with probably hundreds of thousands of other people on the Mount of Olives. We just saw the Mount of Olives. He tells his disciples to go down into the city to find a place to practice the Passover Seder, which we Jews are about to do on this Wednesday night. And they find Mark. They go up to the upper room of his house. The 12 disciples get together. They have their Passover Seder. They do the blessing over the wine and the matzah. This is my body. This is my blood. The Eucharist. You know, there's not an agreement within the Christian world whether that was a literal or symbolic happening, depending on whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, whatever. There's Mount Zion. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Last Supper room, which is here we can see the Church of the Dormition, where Mary, one of the sites where it's believed that she went to sleep, and also to the right you can make out a little bit of the outside of the Last Supper room.
Okay, the Last Supper, or the upper room, obviously was on the 2nd floor. But Jesus already informed his disciples, go and look for something that will get intimate and we will be able to dine and to celebrate the Passover. And he said to them, you'll meet a man. So they've met that man and they rent the upper room. None of them, beside Judas, that he was from the area, but not from Jerusalem itself, did not have any residence. Most of them were Galileans. So they needed to rent something or to lease something that it will be a little bit, not just on the temple. Don't forget they were Galileans and they were chased by the others. Different accent, a little bit probably different look. And it can be as a small family celebrating the Passover. So they rented a room on the 2nd floor, which it's believed to be on Mount Zion. And why Mount Zion? Because Mount Zion it's not attached to the temple. There is a distance, so no one would kind of look for them over there. I think I remember. So anyway, they were all doing that traditional ceremony that it's still being done in Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
The leader of the Seder, the head of the family, which was Jesus, provided the wine. He drank and he offered it to his disciples as we do today. But he added to it, this wine is my blood, not the physical blood, the spirituality, the spiritual blood.
Right.
And will come together, believe. The same he does with the bread. And then the next scenario, which is kind of used even today, the washing. Usually the head of the family, his feet, today it's his hands, are being washed by his best man. And all of a sudden, which is shocking, we would all expected Peter to walk, that he will be asked to wash his feet. He asked the one that turned him up, betrayed him, which was Judas. And that's what he did.
Right.
After the Last Supper,
but
they had to
before we get
remain
to after the Last Supper, I always found there was a part in the Last Supper, I think it's in Mark, where Jesus tells Peter he asks him, how many swords do you have? And if you don't have a sword, he tells the disciples, sell your purse and buy one. What do you make of this? That when then Peter comes back and says, we have two swords. What do you make of this? Why does Jesus tell the disciples that they need to arm themselves?
Because the disciples were Galileans and they were troublemakers, because all of a sudden they're following the Son of God or God himself. Mm-hmm. And that was just, what about all those gods and goddesses and all those generals and all those conquerors and all the leaders of the Roman regime that will risk, and all of a sudden, how can a human being can be my ruler or my creator, or how come a beautiful sculpture that I've made can create myself, or I can follow it? And that was very risky. The Jewish Sanhedrin and the Jewish priests were not, they couldn't even change anything, but that was a risk for the whole people, that all of a sudden that the one God sent his son or himself as a Messiah, or the one that will release everyone. And that was very dangerous for the belief and for their income as well.
Right. So, I always look at that and I'm like, okay, so what's going on? There's a small rebellion going on. We know that there's different Jewish sects at the time that are fighting the Romans. We call them the Zealots or the Sicarii. Those are the guys who fought to the death at Masada. And they're running around and they're killing Romans. And of course, for the Jews at the time, they perceive the Messiah as being a figure who will come and fight the Romans and destroy the Romans, much like Judah Maccabee threw the Greeks out of Judea. The Zealots and other Jews at the time see the messianic figure as someone who's going to lead the Jews away in battle. We see that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We see it in some of the Talmudic literature. And perhaps Jesus understood that the Jews around him maybe would start a rebellion once he announced himself by coming into Jerusalem triumphantly. As a matter of fact, the next day on the Mount of Olives, Judas betrays him with the kiss at Gethsemane, which means oil press in Greek, Gethsemane, which is in the middle of this beautiful olive tree garden of some of the most ancient olive trees in the world on the Mount of Olives. And Judas betrays him with the kiss. And Peter, when the guards of the high priest come to arrest Jesus, Peter takes his sword out and cuts off the ear of one of the guards. And is this the beginning of there's Gethsemane right there, the church of all nations. And you can see some of the trees in the background. It's really a beautiful place. That's where Judas betrays Jesus. Peter chops off the ear, but Jesus goes the other way. He doesn't lead a rebellion. He says enough, and he actually heals the guard's ear, and he's arrested and he's taken to the high priest, where they ask him if he's Messiah. He doesn't deny it. He's turned over to Pontius Pilate, which is the first station of the way of the cross for some people in the Christian world. What's going on here?
First of all, at that time, there were all kind of leaders. Some of them were phone leaders. So there were all kind of rebels and all kind of little groups that were trying to uprise. And probably with the sword, there are dual explanations, because symbolically, Jesus was preparing them that he'll be crucified on a tree, on a wood, because the crosses were made of wood. So that could have been a hint. On the other hand, maybe just to protect themselves. And there are no definitions. But a lot of leaders, a lot of messiahs, a lot of groups rose up at that time. None of them remained. We don't even know all their names. No one knows all their names. And the one that we really know and started kind of a group of people or a new believers, that's Christianity, and that's with Jesus. And that's took place, to remind you, in Easter, not Christmas.
Right. And here we have inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I find that very interesting what you just said. For instance, it's Passover. Jesus is taken off at the first station of the cross in Herod's fortress. This is the 12th station of the cross, I believe. But at the first station of the cross, there's the entrance of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Pontius Pilate says, "Okay, it's Passover. I'm going to release one of your big prisoners," and he takes out two prisoners. He takes out Jesus of Nazareth, and he takes out a guy, the murderer, Barabbas. And I've always found it very interesting that it's the Romans who call him a murderer. His name Barabbas is really a Greek version of the Aramaic Barabba, Bar being son, Abba being father, son of the father. And you yourself say that there were many little rebels running around, and they all had their own leader. They all had their own messianic figure. Maybe Barabbas was trying to be Messiah himself, running around killing Romans, arrested by the Romans. So when Jesus and Barabbas are brought out before the mob, and Pontius Pilate says, "Who do you want to release, Jesus, the turn the other cheek guy, or Barabbas, the guy who's actively murdering or killing Roman centurions in this rebellion that ends with Masada?" And the zealots are like, "Oh, we want our guy. We want Barabbas." You can see that maybe the interpretation where Jesus isn't released and Pontius Pilate washes his hands of that decision. What do you make of that whole scene called the beginning of the Passion?
Well, don't forget, we're using today the name Jesus, but his name was Yeshua, which means in English redemption or savior. Barabba was a common name as John Silver or whatsoever today. Barabba means, as you said, the son of the Father. Maybe Jesus had lots of followers, and they did not recognize him as redemption. They called him the son of the Father, the son of God, not the Father or the main daddy. And Pontius Pilate just released because it was much easier. Probably Barabbas also had a group of followers, but not as much as Jesus. And that could have been a major misunderstanding between the crowds and Pontius Pilate.
Right.
Christianity, when you see it in art or decorating, Pontius Pilate is washing his hands. I asked the crowd, it's a high holiday, as today it's very common that in high holidays you're releasing prisoners. I asked the crowd, that's what you asked me to do. But who knows whether they meant Jesus, that was called redemption, or Barabbas, that was a murderer, was a criminal, that was called the son of the Father. We don't know that.
Right. It's very interesting. So Jesus is condemned. He's stripped. He's beaten. The Romans play dice for his clothes. There's the third station of the cross. In the third station, he falls down, and I believe it was Simon helps him carry his cross. He walks up the hill and outside the city and into. He meets Veronica on the way. Mary greets him along the way as well, and he goes up out of the city to a hill called Golgotha, which in Aramaic is for the Hebrew Golgolet, which is skull, hill of the skull, cavalry, it's also called. And he's taken to the top of this hill, which was at the time outside the city. He's nailed to the cross. The cross is erected. He's dying slowly. His followers gather above him. He's crucified with two criminals, one to each side. Tell us about this.
Well, first of all that crucifixion thing, we don't hear about, we know that others were crucified and through the market. But here it's more powerful because we get stop by stop or station by station. It was humiliation. Haha. You thought he is the God, he's the savior. First of all, they among the crowd, very heavy tree that would have held them. We are not sure it will look to the cross, but more likely that it looked like as a cross today. And people were challenged to come and watch the crucifixion. That was also could have been a threat. You'll misbehave or you'll find all those messiahs or messengers, you'll be crucified as well. Because Jesus was accused for being a king of the Jews. What do you mean by that, a king of the Jews? I haven't seen him wearing a crown. And that's why he was getting also a crown of thorns. And all that flagellation, that's the human's nature. When they can get their aggravation, and probably at that period of time, a lot of people did not have freedom. There wasn't any kind of democracy. So also they challenged themselves to hit all their aggravation to spare out. And probably there were others from all kind of phony leaders that were also afraid that they will be condemned and they'll be crucified. So Jesus was crucified, which is the worst death penalty, not as to die when you get gas action shooting. It's government. It's a very, very slow death at the Gina factories, and there is nothing to relay. And after he was dead, his disciples brought him down from Golgotha, from the crucifixion hill, from the common crucifixion hill, and all the purification and the shroud. Don't forget, this is a walled city. He needed to be buried before sunset. And that took place end of March, early April. At that time, there wasn't much time. They couldn't go and bury in a proper burial or cemetery. And they put the shrouds. And then Joseph, the Arimathean, offered them or proposed them to bury him in his own and in his own family burial cave. And that's what they did. Now, you showed in the photo, and that's what it looked like in biblical times. That's how people would have
tomb. Just to let's take a look at this picture for a second. So Joseph basically what we find in the church, in and around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the pictures that we just saw, there are underneath lots of tombs from the first century. And we know that after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the second century, Hadrian, the Caesar Hadrian, after he put the revolt down, this tomb where Jesus had been crucified had become a shrine, and he wanted to erase, being a pagan king, he wanted to erase the memory of it. So he built a big temple to Aphrodite there. And later, when the Roman Empire became Christian under Constantine, his mother Helena came and had them peel away the layers of Hadrian's temple to Aphrodite. And when the tomb showed itself, she had a revelation that this was Jesus's tomb, and she built an edicule over it, a tomb, a sepulcher underneath the tomb, which would have looked something like this picture we see now. According to tradition, after Joseph of Arimathea gave his tomb, as you said, over for Jesus to be buried, he bought another tomb nearby. And that, according to tradition, what we just saw was his tomb. There it is. So it's interesting. There's a notch to the right where the stone would have been, that would have rolled in and out over the tomb. Maybe if Jono can find that picture of the we'll talk some more, but while he's looking, the picture of the tomb with the stone in front of it, that would be perfect. But so what happened? So Jesus is crucified. He's actually put out of his misery by a Roman centurion who stabs him in the rib. And then, according to the New Testament, there's an earthquake in the temple. There's the tomb, and Jesus's blood drips into the crack that the earthquake split open the earth on the Temple Mount, on the site of Golgotha, and drips all the way down, according to tradition, into Adam's tomb. This isn't Jesus's tomb, but this is from the exact time where Jesus would have been buried. And what we can see is a rock-cut tomb with an arch, with stairs going down into. Jews have to be buried in the ground, so this goes underground. And then there's a stone. When the Gospels talks that the stone had already been rolled away from the tomb, it's more like an olive press stone, like a wheel. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that part of the story? After Jesus dies, after he's put in the tomb, Mary and Mary come to the tomb. What do they find?
Well, it's a heavy stone, and you need a couple of men or an ox to remove it. The stone has been rolled over. Sorry, they went in, they've looked, the tomb was empty. And that was a little bit shocking, because don't forget that all that kind of complex cemetery was outside of the city walls, and there were wild animals. That's why they had the rock to protect it. But then Jesus met with the two people that were watching the crucifixions and were troubled, and he walked them all the way to their village and explained to them the village of Abu Ghosh or Emmaus. When they realized who he was, he disappeared. Then he met his mother, he met Mary Magdalene, he was dining with his disciples, and that's mainly the Passover, that he was resurrected. And then by the end, he gathered with his disciples up on a tomb area on Mount of Olives. He addressed his disciples about the future and giving them the methods how to create or how to, and then he was ascended. And he said to his disciples that he'll be back in later days.
Right.
So in Christian perspective, the Messiah was here, he was risen, he will return. From a Jewish perspective, the Messiah hasn't arrived yet.
Right. So that's very interesting. So in that tomb, when they go into the tomb, they found that the stone had already been rolled away. They go inside. There's a man in white dress saying he is risen. Go and tell the disciples, and then we see Jesus reappear 3 times after the resurrection. I do find it interesting in Jewish tradition. There's the idea that there'll be 2 messiahs. There'll be the earthly Messiah who will lead us into freedom against our oppressors, and then there will be the heavenly Messiah who will bring the heavenly kingdom down upon us to earth to rule, to have 1,000 years of peace and enlightenment. And there is definitely some synergy between the 2 traditions, where Jesus was here to try to lead us to a spiritual freedom, and then when the world is ready for it, we'll come back and have that 1,000 years of peace and enlightenment. So I definitely do see some synergy between the 2 religious beliefs. Anyway, Daphne Bondy, thank you so much. Very insightful. I learned a lot myself. I can't wait to have tourists come back again to Israel so you can lead them next Easter, hopefully next Passover. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Jonathan Rose, our tech guru and Condé Nast Traveler Israel specialist for 2020. There he is. Thank you so much. And the next 2 podcasts that we're going to do, one with Rabbi David Wilfond about the Passover, and another with Pastor David Simerson and his wife, the educator at the Cornerstone Church in Minnesota, Sarah Simerson. So until then, take care and happy holidays. Thank you.
Chag Sameach, happy holiday, and next year in Jerusalem, Palm Sunday and Easter. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.